Greetings, everyone. My name is Eric Bliss. I'm the Youth Ministry Specialist for the Pacific Western region. I am a white, heterosexual, cisgendered male, and I live in Denver, Colorado. This video is an introduction to caucusing. We've had a big increase in the interest in caucusing across the region, and so a group of our youth and young adults have put together a tremendous how-to video on what to do, how to do it, and how to get the most out of huddling around identity groups.
Hi everyone, I'm Ramona Salgado from Colorado Springs. I'm a peer chaplain for the Mountain Desert District. I'm Hispanic, queer, able-bodied, and I'm here to talk to you all about preparing to caucus. I myself have participated in several race caucuses and 2 gender caucuses. So, for those of you who haven't caucused before or don't know what caucusing is, it's when people with shared identities come together to discuss a common purpose and create a course of action that will reflect their shared values. These mutually identifying groups are usually separate between minority and majority groups. But with this in mind, we must remember that we are very much multi-identity beings and have very different experiences. For example, a person of color is still a person of color when they enter into a gender caucus, and their gender experience may be very different from that of a white person. So, even though caucuses are oriented around one identity, intersectionality and overlapping identities must be respected. Along with this, when caucusing at youth events, adult roles should be kept to a minimum. People who are dominating a conversation should make space for others to talk, and people who haven't contributed as much should try to take that space and share what they think.
This next segment that Ramona leads talks about 3 areas that in a pre-caucusing workshop you can prepare your folks to get ready to do the tough work of caucusing. So first, she'll talk about the beginner's workshop for those who've had 0 to 1 caucuses. Then she'll talk about those who've had a couple of caucuses, 2 to 3 caucuses, what they can expect, what they should do, and what questions they should investigate in their pre-caucusing workshop. And then finally, what the experts in caucusing, how they can help facilitate and lead small groups once the real caucusing begins.
I now invite you all to think about privilege. It can be easier to notice the oppression that you personally experience over the privilege that you experience, since being treated poorly likely stands out more than being treated fairly. Next, ask yourself, what are the isms? What do I know about the patriarchy? How does white fragility distort and restrict conversations? How can we be direct rather than protecting that white fragility? How does it feel to be called in? How can we respond in these moments rather than reacting or getting defensive? Now, for those of you who have caucused around 2 or 3 times, what questions do you have about caucusing, intersectionality, or other related topics? What has caucusing been like before? What have you learned from previous caucuses? How would you like to approach it this time based on what you've learned? And finally, for those of you who have participated in 4 or more caucuses, you should help lead small group discussions with prompts written by event leaders in advance, along with the flexibility to let the conversation go where it will, and be open to helping in report backs. Watch the group dynamic, encourage open-mindedness, and be observant of frustration or distress. If discussions begin slowing down, ask "I wonder" questions to keep them running. Also be mindful of those who are struggling with caucusing and help them avoid feeling humiliated. Humiliation will more than likely make them shut down. Help them learn from their mistakes with kindness to help them understand what they can do to be better. And when separating into groups, see if it is possible to break down into micro-identities. Caucusing can be difficult, but it can also be empowering. That's why it's important to be open to different perspectives. Many youth are nervous for or have a negative outlook on caucusing because it's not always a comfortable environment. However, it's good to be open to discomfort, to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Sometimes, before caucusing in the Mountain Desert District, we will center ourselves all together with a song. This helps to remind us of the unity that we are striving to deepen through caucusing. Thanks everybody for listening, and good luck with caucusing.
Hi, I'm Eliana Okason. I'm 17. I'm a senior in high school, and I attend the First Unitarian Society of Denver. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a summer seminary graduate and have deaned 2 social justice cons in the Mountain Desert District of the UUA. I'm white, I'm female, and I'm ethnically Jewish. I've been part of two gender caucuses and 5-ish race caucuses. So within the actual caucus, before the caucusing part starts, it's really important to sit down and have a conversation with everybody in the caucus to understand where we're coming from. And one of the things we need to keep at the forefront is that we are a faith-based community and that we are gathering together under our covenant and our principles. This is a great time to review the covenant, especially the thoughts about our impact and intent versus our impact on others, and the recognition the impact is so much more important. At this time, it's also good to remind adults that this is a youth space and to be aware of their voices and how they show up. And going into that, another reminder of intersectionality. While most people would have heard those in the pre-caucusing workshops, it's important to bring that up over and over because we get lost in this idea that we are gathering by a single identity and forget that we are very much multi-identity peoples. And so be aware of how those dynamics play out within the caucus. So within a gender caucus, be aware of race dynamics. The actual caucusing process looks different depending on the caucus. It depends on the size of the caucus and several things, but within any caucus, a small group format is ideal to allow space for all voices to be heard. So in groups of 4 to 6, including one of the leaders who was part of the pre-caucus briefing. So before the caucus, during the pre-caucusing workshops, individuals who have participated in 4 or more caucuses were part of a workshop on how to lead within the caucuses. So within the small group format, there should be one of those people in each group, and the conversation will proceed from there using questions that were determined by the caucus leaders within that workshop. And these youth part of that workshop should have included skills on how to keep a conversation going and further open up a conversation as need be. So the intention within these caucuses is to have time to discuss what it means to exist with the identity that we're caucusing around. And it's how our identity works within relation to others and other identities. And within the privilege caucus, a lot of that conversation is around how do we use this identity to show up for racial justice or gender equality or other justice movements. The small group conversations will continue for the large proportion of the caucus, and if it seems fit, you can rotate small groups to get different voices, different people to experience different voices within the groups. And at the end of the caucus, come together as a big group and debrief. Within this, make sure to create explicit intersectional time, and that looks like saying, in an explicit manner, this is time for people who find themselves at the intersection of female and people of color, or white and LGBTQ folks. So it's explicit and it's there, and have that awareness that this time is for those voices. And that is the general caucusing process. What a good caucus looks like. One of the most successful caucuses I've been in is a white caucus at our Leadership Development Con last fall. We had done gender caucusing previously in the day, and during the gender caucusing, the voices of people of color had been steamrolled over. And so within the white caucus, we were able to have a conversation about how our privilege had showed up in that instance, and how we don't often see that, but this is a very tangible example of where we've done something wrong and how we can do better. So we had the time to discuss how we felt about that, and then once we talked through all of those feelings and that, we moved on to making a list of commitments for how we were going to act in the future from our position of privilege. And the participants left that caucus feeling humbled, informed, and empowered to do better in the future, which is the goal of a caucus. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Paloma Cayo. I use she, her pronouns. I'm originally from Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, but I am currently based in Cusco, Peru. I'm a YA member of the PWR Multicultural team. I have lots of PNWD con staff experience, and I'm a graduate of both Thrive Multicultural Leadership School and Summer Seminary. I ethnically identify as mixed, Peruvian and Irish, and Latina. I've co-led 4 POC caucuses in the past, both youth and intergenerational, and I participated in many POC caucuses and a couple of Latino caucuses. I'm going to wrap this guide up by explaining our post-caucus model and method. So one of the main reasons that we caucus is so that we can come back into our UU community stronger and more equipped to support each other. So sharing and reflecting on the caucusing experience is really vital to understanding and lifting up one another in our identities and experiences. The PWR Multicultural team has come to the agreement that the most productive way to decompress and reflect post-caucus is with the fishbowl method. So the goal is to get an understanding of what it means to be on the margins, what it means to live with a particular identity. Each identity group has the chance to share and discuss the highlights of their caucus, and the other identities sit on the outside and listen to the identity group in the fishbowl. And then they're allowed to ask questions to get clarity about the fishbowl group's caucusing experience. So above all, this is really a time for learning, empathetic listening, and when the opportunity presents itself, calling in. When calling in, I statements are always encouraged. So starting a comment or question with "I noticed that," for example, when you're commenting on someone else's opinion or experience is ideal. Confidential issues and tragedies are always left out unless the individual owning the story chooses to share their own experience. Although this part of the caucusing process really is vital to the overall growth of our community, marginalized groups always have the option to opt out of the fishbowl report back. It's important to note that often POC caucusing becomes more of a sanctuary and can be drastically different to a structured caucus. In this case, I personally feel that it's still important to share the fact that it was a sanctuary and perhaps a few reasons why it became that space, rather than opting out entirely from sharing. There's just as much to learn from the initial needs and energy of the room as there is to learn from discussion points or revelations. So after caucusing, it's also really critical to give participants an opportunity to reflect and emotionally digest the deep and charged issues that are often talked about during caucuses. So having set intentional time and space for processing afterwards is really recommended, rather than providing, for example, simple free time or transitioning immediately into the next segment of the event. That can be really jarring for some people after such an emotionally charged time. So one way to support this reflective element is to set up multiple intelligence stations with distinct areas for sculpting, journaling, simple games, crafts, drawing, etc. So everyone has some time to wind down from the caucus and process their thoughts and emotions in their own way. So using these methods, we really hope to fulfill a more interconnected effect with the caucusing practice and make returning to our wider community a really large part of the lasting impression of caucusing. Thanks for listening.
This was a production of the Pacific Western Region Multicultural team. Thanks for tuning in. I'd like to particularly send gratitude to Ramona Salgado, Eliana Okason, and Paloma Cayo for contributing their insight and expertise. And I also want to give a shout out to our Pacific Western Region Multicultural team leaders, youth, Ramona Salgado and Elliot Farrell Carity. Take care and caucus well.